Welcome to Preparing for Online Delivery, a video series on planning, organizing, and teaching in an online environment. I am Bree Smith, the Media Trainer and Communications Lead in the Academic Development Center and your moderator for these videos. I am joined by three of my colleagues from the ADC.
Hi, I'm Patty Mascaro, and I'm one of the instructional designers on the instructional design team in the ADC.
Hello, I am Luciano Santos, Faculty Development Consultant at ADC.
Hello, everybody. My name is John Cheeseman. I am an educational technologist in the ADC.
Over the next few videos, we'll be delving deeper into facilitating your course for remote delivery. This first video will focus on engagement. So, Luciano, how can faculty engage their students in an online environment?
Thanks, Bree. Yes, student engagement is a very important topic and one that we should pay attention when facilitating an online class. There are some specifics that we're going to be talking more later in this video in terms of synchronous and asynchronous strategies, but generically speaking, there's also some considerations we all must apply. The first one is being upfront about our expectations on student engagement. So letting our students know that we do expect them to be active participants in our classes is a quite important initial statement in our class, and one that goes a long way in terms of setting up how we expect them to be behaving in the class. The second point in terms of student engagement is maintaining our presence in an online environment so that students are perceiving us, they are seeing us even though we are at a distance, and then it enhances their chances of being engaged in the class. So some strategies we can use is first to become visible in that online environment, either through communication tools that John explained in different videos, such as announcements. We can also use self-recorded videos and audio so that the students can have a relationship with you. There's also an opportunity for you to set up routine communication with your students, such as weekly announcements outlining that week's activities, because then the students are seeing you participating in that conversation and seeing you responding to their needs. In those communications, it's also important to address your students, specifically pointing out some stellar work that some students might have done in the previous interactions you have with them. And that, again, signals to students that you are paying attention to their participation. You might also want to increase your presence online by setting up office hours where you connect with your students. And always with synchronous sessions, you're going to be engaging with them. So any strategies you can use to maintain your presence and to remind your students that you are there with them in that journey. Another strategy you can use to maintain that student engagement is to keep your Blackboard shell organized. As John mentioned in a previous video around organizing your Blackboard shell, it's quite important that you have information readily available and also easy to find so that students don't have to spend time looking for information. And the reason why that is important and supports student engagement is that you diminish their chance of becoming frustrated in finding information you want them to find. So again, some generic strategies that you can use to increase that motivation and student engagement. I don't know if my panelists also have some other strategies they want to share in terms of, globally speaking, how to maintain their students' engagement.
Yeah, I definitely do, Luciano. And I just want to echo your point around setting the expectations around this participation piece. It's so critical for you to set the tone right away in the course of what the students need to be doing. And at a distance, even if you've been in some of our synchronous sessions, sometimes the discussion, all it is crickets. You want to avoid that. And, you know, there's certain things that we've done in the past in regular classrooms to cultivate participation. And sometimes it might look like applying a little bit of a grade to that. We know that's kind of the student paycheck is grades. So I would be really clear on your expectations for the course and how and set out to the students how they're expected to participate. The cracks are large to fall in an online environment, and I would almost say to my students, look at, we need to be on the ball here or else you will not be successful. So this is critical to your success in this course for this semester, is that you do, you know, A, B, and C and X, Y, and Z. So I just want to echo that. That's so crucial.
Just to add to that, and actually, I think I'm quoting both you, Luciano, and John on this. The whole piece around being transparent, making sure that students know why you're asking them to be doing certain things, and showing them a little bit behind the curtain, especially in this time of COVID-19. We're all on a learning curve here, and sometimes things are not going to go perfectly. And if we're all engaged and participating in things, sometimes things aren't going to go as planned. And so being just really transparent, open, communicate about that, and take those learnings that everybody's taking along the way as moments for everybody in the class to learn. And so I think that by addressing that, there's a way of cultivating engagement there. It takes some of the risk of being in this new environment out of the way, so people feel free to engage and not worry about making mistakes. Kind of like ourselves in doing these videos. We're doing some learning curves and working with our own things that we may not have been as comfortable with at first.
100%, Patty and John. And again, like it's being creating that connection with your students. I think that's the key thing, either through transparency, to setting up expectations, to providing some opportunities for them to engage with the course in different ways. Like there are many different strategies we can implement, but at the end of the day, it is a course, and if you are positioning yourself as a partner in that course, chances are higher that your students are also going to take up that partnership.
What strategies can faculty use to keep their students engaged in a synchronous session?
Thank you, Bri. So now breaking down that engagement piece into more detailed opportunities. So first one, in terms of synchronous sessions, those sessions that take place most likely out through Google Meet, where all students and facilitators are accessing it at the same time. So the first strategy we can use is being purposeful about the use of that synchronous session, and like ensuring that you have particular goals or objectives that you want to achieve through that synchronous session, and that those goals and or objectives are really achievable by that format. And Patty has already engaged in some conversation around that in the planning phase of these pod videos. So I do encourage you to revisit that that video, or there's also a web page talking about those the different aspects of synchronous and asynchronous, so that you ensure that whatever you're trying to achieve in that synchronous session is achievable through that format. The other strategy you can use is actually to employ a variety of engagement opportunities for your students. You can do that by different ways. You can first leveraging different tools that are available to us, such as the chat option that you have in every Google Meet session. But you also can incorporate other tools such as Google Forms, and that will allow you and your students to do some quick quizzes or some other surveys. You can add tools such as Nod extension, where it allows students to quickly interact in a non-verbal way to you. So there's some different tools you can embed to Google Meet just to make that synchronous session more interactive. And also, as we are recording the sessions in June, there are some rumors that Google Meet might be adding some other interactivity too. So stay tuned if that is the case when September comes. The other strategy, and John has fleshed that out in his session on collaboration, is around the notion of breaking out your larger groups into smaller groups, and then fostering that conversation through smaller breakout groups. That makes it also easier for students to interact. We know that when you have 30 or 40 or even larger number of students online or participants online in a synchronous session, chances for folks to turn on their microphones are quite slim. It is a quite easy mode for us to hide ourselves. So by creating smaller groups where you have maybe 3, 4, 5 participants in a session, you increase the chances that students are going to be participating. So one way you can leverage those breakout rooms is to provide some specific guidance as to what you want your students to be discussing, whether it is a discussion on the topics that were covered in your pre-recorded video, or something that you did just discuss in the large class, or maybe it's an activity that you want them to be doing. Whatever is the case, be clear that those objectives are really specific, and the guidance for them to achieve those activities are really specific and clear to them. One way you can do that is by creating a Google Doc with all those guiding questions, and then sharing that document with them up front, so that they have that at their disposal when they're engaging in a conversation. The other strategy you might want to use is to encourage your students to, anytime they want to participate in your class, do so via microphone. So encourage them to speak up literally, and share their thoughts and comments or questions through the microphone instead of using the chat. It can be quite distracting for you as instructor to maintain a conversation in the main room, but also control the chat feed. So invite your students to take advantage of that too. Some instructors also would like to have their students using cameras as well, their video feed in those synchronous chats. And even though that's a nice invitation to make, I would just remind that some students might prefer not to share their videos for any number of reasons. So they might have, they might be accessing your class in a setting that they don't want to share. For instance, they're accessing it from a living room, and they don't want to share the mess that they have around themselves. Maybe they have smaller kids that might be roaming around, and they don't want to share those the image of their kids to a larger group. So be mindful of that when you request your students to turn on their cameras. There's also considerations around bandwidth. Video feeds consume larger amounts of bandwidth, and some students might not have that internet connectivity available to them. So things to consider when you're requiring them to turn on their cameras. So my panelists, anything else you want to talk in terms of synchronous sessions and how to keep them engaging?
So, Luciano, one of the things that we talked about with faculty in the live versions of these sessions was maybe recruiting some of your students to be co-facilitators, to moderate the chat. And so, again, there's a way to engage students. You can have a rotating moderator role in which your students can co-lead the session, or and it helps you with managing larger classes as in a virtual synchronous environment. It can be a bit overwhelming to keep track of maybe what's happening in chat, if you're using the nod extension, who's raising their hands, and so forth. So just having someone there to help you out is really great. And if you can have a student helper, again, that's a form of engagement that again is helping them be a partner in the course.
That is a great suggestion. Thank you so much, Patty. Because again, it's ways in which we can engage our students in become more active in our sessions. John, anything to add?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, where I come from around synchronous sessions, for me, those sessions are about supporting students and coaching students and making it a really positive experience to keep them going as they move through the asynchronous portion of the course. So in my mind, I don't see it necessary to have many synchronous sessions as a full group throughout the session or throughout the semester, but really strategically plan when those full synchronous sessions would fall. And in my mind, it would be before midterms, before exams, or before a major submission. Also, if you know that students have been working really hard through one patch of the course, maybe bring them together and just really celebrate all that hard work and recognize it and identify it. But then I think the little twist would be that since you're not meeting as a full group synchronously a lot, it frees you up to meet with smaller groups. And that's another way to leverage the synchronous space, is by getting those smaller groups and getting more quality interactions in those smaller groups, and then and moving on from there. So that's kind of my perspective on how to leverage synchronous sessions. And I'm biased. I like my ideas. I'm sure you guys will have great ideas on your own, but that's the point I would like to make. And also, yeah, and twice you kind of touched on it, Luciano. no one asked to be in this situation. We're all here because we have to be here where we are. And we need to be mindful of that. And that's why I think it's even more critical for us to be very positive and very supportive for our students through this. And as Patty said, be transparent. Admit that you are fallible and you will make mistakes, but we'll make mistakes together and we'll correct mistakes together. And so I just want you to be mindful of that too as you go through this. The words of Nell Noddings comes to mind. Some of you might be familiar with Nell Noddings. She's famous for speaking on education. But she once, I was at a talk, and she once said, for the things that you're passionate about, you can be excellent. But in other things, you can be adequate, and adequate is good enough. Adequate gets the job done. Adequate is okay. So embrace those things. Go easy on yourself, and just. I think these vulnerabilities can actually be an access point to help create community in your class. So allow yourself to be vulnerable and allow you to gel with your students around those vulnerabilities. And in there, I think you can find some strength and build some community. Probably a bit more than you're looking for, but there you go.
No, John, that's actually a very important reminder. First, to take care of ourselves and to also understand where our students are coming from. They might be facing this online reality for the first time as well. So helping them transition to this online environment and showing that vulnerability will help them articulate their own vulnerabilities as well. So again, embarking that journey together. So here are some tips and suggestions.
What about strategies for asynchronous delivery?
Thanks, Bri. And again, because we are recommending that you don't rely heavily on synchronous activities, you might be asking yourself, okay, what do I do in my time? If I'm meeting with my students twice a week, or normally I would be meeting my students twice a week in a face-to-face environment, how do I keep up with that time if I'm no longer teaching those 2 sessions per week synchronously? And that's where asynchronous activities, things that students can do at their own pace and time, kicks in. You have plenty of options available to you. And in the pod website, we do have some links to repositories that give you some ideas and some strategies as to how you want to use up that time. But in terms of engagement piece, one thing to understand is whenever you are using tools that require technology, it's not that you're going to be becoming an expert in those tools, but you do need to know the affordances of those tools, but also the pitfalls of them. And that is certainly true for tools that are not supported by Mount Royal. So for instance, if you're using some tools that allow you for extra interactivity, such as Mentimeter or some other plugins that you can attach to your PowerPoint session recordings to add more sparkle, such as Prezi. You also have to be mindful of the limitations of those tools, especially if you don't have the full version of them. So just be mindful of those. And also when you ask your students to use those tools, also be mindful of what kind of limitations will they face with that. The other thing is, as always is the case, be purposeful about the selection of activities, but then be clear about why you're selecting that. The transparency piece that we already highlighted in this video is so crucial, especially because students might be doing these activities at their own pace. So their ability to ask you questions becomes limited. They can still email you, they can still post their questions into a Q&A forum that you might have created, but that will not be immediate. So ensure that you have all the directions students might need handy for them. Ensure that you have explicit directions. Maybe even include exemplars that showcase to students what is expected from them in that activity. These are some things that you can use so that helps diminishing that anxiety from your students. The other piece, and this is especially true for discussion boards. And again, we already talked a little bit about discussion boards in previous recordings, but I think here what is super important is balancing your own participation. Yes, by participating in a discussion board, you are increasing your visibility to your students. So it's important for you to respond to some posts and to be active member of that conversation. But also be careful not to over participate and reply to every single posting, because what that can result is students will be less inclined to respond back and then to create a conversation. So try to create a balance between engaging in the conversation, facilitating the discourse that is emerging from that discussion board without stiffening the conversation by being over present. It's the same thing as parenting. We want to give our kids some space without becoming helicopter parents. John, Patty, anything else you want to add?
Just around the discussion board piece, and definitely there's that whole, as you said, kind of having the balance between guiding students, but not kind of pushing in too much uh, so that they're waiting for you as the quote unquote expert to come in and sort of tell them the answer. But the other more like I guess a practical piece around that is also workload, finding that balance of engaging, helping students engage, and so that they are doing things. You don't have to do everything for them, and you want to be aware of that workload. You want to be able to make sure you're going in at strategic times to encourage that engagement and then allowing it to happen. There are times where you do have to go in and prompt, but there are other times you need to pull back. And all of that takes time. And so you want to be aware of that time. So there's sort of this balancing act around that. And I bring up that workload piece because you don't want to be burning yourself out. You need to be with the students throughout the whole semester here. And so, again, being strategic in how the instructor to student engagement happens, and keeping in mind those workload issues will be beneficial in the long run, just in keeping the energy of the course going.
Discussion boards can turn into a really ugly monster. That's the reality of discussion boards. If you're not explicit about the rules of engagement to that discussion board, you can end up with a lot of text generated in a discussion board. So you want to be mindful of all those things, and that goes back to your planning. And ultimately, what are we asking here? We're asking for students to engage the content, to engage their learning, and in some way evidence their learning. So, I think if we just keep reminding ourselves of what are the basic pieces to a good education, you will find your way, and you will find the things that work for you and fit for your context. But it's so easy for us to get lost in the clouds. But if we just come back to those learning objectives, the alignment between our objectives and content and assessment, and all those good things that we always do, things should fall into place. And just like any other school year and any other mode of delivery, things will go this way, things will go that way, and we manage. We get through the other side. So things won't be really any different from that. You'll just be experiencing it online, probably for the first time, maybe, or maybe more times for people who have more experience in this delivery mode. But the fundamentals don't change. So just I think that one fundamental that does change in this mode is that you just need to be very focused and very strict and very structured in how you want to lay out your course for the semester. And I know we do this in our regular modes as well, but I think you just need to be a little more extra explicit and extra transparent, and maybe even an extra more supportive of your students in this type of mode in this time.
Absolutely, John. That structure is key to an effective online course, especially at this moment where we are rapidly pivoting to remote delivery. It's important for us to be paying attention to that, and also to be mindful that this is not a change that is going to become the norm. This is just one, maybe 2 semesters that we're pivoting to that remote delivery. So being mindful of that, and even as John mentioned, using those fundamentals, especially what you want your students to be learning, those learning objectives, as guidance, and maybe even simplifying some components of your course that will still allow your students to achieve those learning objectives, but in a way that is still manageable in an online environment. So that's also a conversation that you have to have with yourself, just in terms of your planning, how you're going to be engaging your students, and at up to what point is good enough. Like what is the good enough point in every of those learning objectives, that you can still feel comfortable with the rigor and work that your students have put together, but at the same time not overwhelming you and your students.
One of the things that, in recalling some of the live sessions that we did with faculty, I know that they really appreciated some concrete examples of maybe some activities, and we all kind of have our favorites, but I just kind of want to throw out that on the pod website, that there are resources that you can look through. Luciano mentioned repositories and so forth, but I'd just like to throw out an example of something you could do. The jigsaw activities are quite. I've seen them used many times face-to-face class, and that can be easily done in an online environment using discussion boards. So a different way of it's not just a post and then somebody responds. That you can use the discussion forums to do some of these engaging types of asynchronous activities. And a jigsaw activity, for those who don't know, is students are broken up into one group to explore some sort of a topic. All the different groups have different topics. At a certain point, you kind of break up those groups and mix them and match them up, so that people who were all in different topics are then at the same location and sharing with each other what they each learned about those separate topics. And so those jigsaw activities are very effective, and something that easily translates to an asynchronous online environment. And that's only one example of activities that you can do. I really encourage you to look through those resources and get some ideas. You might find an equivalent of an activity that you would use, or a new activity that might work even better. So uh, just I encourage you to look for those ways to do things a little bit differently that will engage your students.
Patty, these are nice strategies. Thanks so much for sharing that. And the other thing also to be mindful of is just to remind yourself that all instructors in our institution are going through the same process, meaning that they're all trying to find new strategies and new activities that they can employ in their courses. So just tap on your colleagues. Even though we cannot physically knock on their doors in the hallways, but send them a quick email. Our community is known for its peer support. We know our colleagues not only in our departments, but across institution. Tap on that network so that we can create that like a good opportunity for students, a high quality, excellent teaching and learning experience that we are known for in Montreal, and we can still keep that in our environment.
Thanks to Luciano, John, and Patty for your great suggestions. This ends the discussion around student engagement, but be sure to join us in the next video where we cover different ways to deliver your content online. Thanks for watching.